She was a poor girl with nothing left to lose, betrayed by the man she once called husband, hunted by his threats, and ready to end it all. But the night she ran into a burning house to save a stranger's little girl, she didn't know that child belonged to the most feared mafia boss in the city. And when he came to thank her, his gratitude turned into obsession, protection, and a love written in blood. Before we dive in today's journey, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you love dark, emotional love stories. Rain whispered across the empty streets like a quiet funeral song. The city slept under clouds heavy with secrets, but Arya Hale kept walking, her coat clinging to her shoulders, her heart heavier than the night itself. Every step echoed against the wet pavement, a reminder that she was alone again. She had spent years trying to escape the same man who once promised her forever. Her ex-husband, Ryan, had turned love into a weapon, one that left invisible bruises on her soul. Her phone vibrated again. A message. She didn't need to open it, she already knew what it said. If you ever try to move on, I'll end you. I'll ruin anyone who comes near you. Her hands trembled as she shoved the phone into her pocket. For a moment, she stopped under the flickering streetlight, raindrops painting her lashes. She whispered to herself, maybe it would be easier if it all just stopped. The world around her felt endless and cruel. She was tired, tired of pretending, tired of breathing. Then, a sound, a scream. High, terrified, and cutting through the storm. Arya's head snapped up. Down the narrow lane, smoke curled into the night sky. At first, she thought it was thunder, until she saw the orange flicker behind a row of houses. Her feet moved before her mind did. When she turned the corner, the scene burned itself into her memory. A small house engulfed in flames, and in the upstairs window, a little girl, no more than 6 years old, her tiny hands pounding against the glass. "Help me, please! Somebody help!" Arya's breath hitched. No one else was there. No firefighters, no neighbors, only rain and fire and fear. She dropped her bag and sprinted forward. "Hold on," she shouted. "I'm coming!" The heat slammed against her as she pushed the front door open. Flames roared like a living beast. Smoke clawed down her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. She didn't. She wrapped her scarf over her mouth and ran up the burning staircase, boards groaning under her feet. The child's cries guided her through the dark. When she reached the door, she kicked it open. The little girl huddled in a corner, sobbing, face streaked with ash. "It's okay," Arya whispered through coughing fits. "I've got you." She wrapped her coat around the girl, shielding her from falling embers. They stumbled down together, the heat pressing closer, the world collapsing in flames. Arya's lungs screamed for air, her vision blurring. She could barely see the door, but the girl's tiny fingers clung to her hand like hope itself. With a desperate cry, Arya threw her shoulder into the door. It burst open. Cold rain rushed in, dousing her hair and skin. She stumbled out, clutching the child, collapsing onto the wet ground. The girl coughed weakly, but she was alive. Arya brushed soot from her cheeks, whispering, "You're safe now. You're safe." For a moment, relief washed over her like a fragile peace. The rain fell harder, sizzling against the dying flames. But then, her strength gave out. Her chest tightened. The smoke had stolen too much air. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. Her vision swam. She heard the distant sound of engines, cars approaching fast, tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Headlights pierced through the rain. A sleek black car screeched to a halt just meters away. The door swung open. A tall man stepped out, his coat whipping in the wind. He didn't look like the kind of man who ran anywhere, but when his eyes landed on the small child in Arya's arms, his control shattered. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside them. "Isabella!" His voice broke, rough and desperate. The little girl's eyes fluttered open. "Daddy?" Arya's head tilted weakly toward him. Through the haze of smoke and exhaustion, she said, "Oh, his face. Sharp, chiseled, dangerous. But what caught her wasn't his power. It was the raw fear in his eyes. The man, Lorenzo DeLuca, pulled his daughter close, holding her like a man holding the last piece of his soul. He turned toward Arya, rain streaming down his jawline. "Who did this?" he demanded, his tone cutting like a blade. But Arya couldn't answer. Her body trembled. Everything around her dimmed. Lorenzo's men rushed in, weapons drawn, scanning the area. Someone whispered, "Boss, she saved the kid." Lorenzo's gaze softened for a fleeting second. He reached for her shoulder, voice low now. "Stay with me, Bella. Don't close your eyes." Arya tried to respond, but her lips barely moved. All she saw was his gun glinting under the streetlight, and his eyes, dark, furious, and terrified all at once. The rain mixed with the blood and ash on her skin as her body went limp. Lorenzo caught her before she hit the ground. "Call the doctor," he barked, his voice cracking with something unfamiliar. Panic. As his men scrambled, he lifted Arya into his arms. For a moment, he looked down at her, the woman who had just risked everything for his daughter. He didn't even know her name, but something inside him knew. This night would change everything. The storm raged harder. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lorenzo's grip tightened around her as he whispered, "You saved my world, and you don't even know it yet." He turned toward the car, his expression turning cold again. "Find out who set that fire," he ordered, "and burn them all." The camera of the story would fade on the reflection of the flames in his eyes. Fire, meeting fire. As Lorenzo placed Arya's unconscious body in his car, lightning split the sky, and for the first time in years, the Mafia Boss of New York felt something he couldn't control. Fear of losing a stranger who had just saved his life without even knowing it. Morning came hesitantly, as though even the sun feared disturbing the house that had not yet recovered from the night's terror. Pale gold light crept through tall windows framed by velvet sea. Urtons, glinting off crystal vases and the polished marble floor of a bedroom that looked more like a museum than a place for rest. In the middle of the silk-covered bed lay Arya Hale, motionless, her lashes wet with the faint shimmer of dried rain. The world around her smelled of antiseptic, expensive cologne and roses, an impossible mixture that made her question if she was still alive. When her eyes finally fluttered open, she found herself staring up at a ceiling painted with clouds and angels. For a heartbeat, she thought she had died and been sent somewhere far from pain. Then the ache in her ribs and the faint sting of bandages told her the truth. She was still in the land of the living, only now in a place that was far from familiar. She turned her head, slow and wary. A silver tray sat on the nightstand with a glass of water and folded towels. The sheets beneath her were softer than anything she'd owned, whispering against her skin like a secret. Confusion tangled with fear. This wasn't the hospital, and it definitely wasn't home. Her throat was dry, and when she tried to sit up, a low groan slipped from her lips. Across the room, a voice answered the sound, low, deep, and steady. "You shouldn't move yet." Arya froze. From the shadowed corner, a man rose, tall and precise in a black shirt and vest, the faint scent of smoke still clinging to him. Lorenzo DeLuca. Even without remembering his name, she knew it belonged to him. Everything about him looked like it had been carved out of darkness and control. His gaze found her, sharp yet startlingly calm, the gaze of a man used to watching others break. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The ticking of a distant clock filled the silence. Arya's heartbeat thundered in her ears. He moved closer, and light caught the edge of his jaw, the small scar that trailed near his temple. "You're safe," he said quietly, pulling a chair closer to her bed. "My men brought you here after you passed out. You inhaled too much smoke." Her lips parted, the memory of fire flooding back, the heat, the child's screams, the feel of tiny hands clutching her. "The girl," she whispered hoarsely. "Is she—" "She's fine," Lorenzo interrupted, but his tone softened at the mention. "Sleeping in her room, because of you." Arya blinked hard, the relief so sharp it almost hurt. I didn't think, I just saw her. He watched her closely, the muscle in his jaw flexing once. Most people would have waited for help. You didn't. The way he said it made her skin prickle. It wasn't admiration exactly, nor disbelief. It was something heavier, something that suggested he was still trying to decide what she was, an angel who'd fallen into his world, or a problem he couldn't yet categorize. She looked down at her hands, wrapped in clean white gauze. I had to, she murmured. No one else was there. Lorenzo leaned back, folding his hands, studying her as though memorizing every word. His voice lowered to a murmur. People don't risk their lives for strangers anymore, Miss Hale. The way her name rolled off his tongue made her heart jolt. She hadn't told him that. How do you know who I am? She asked softly. His mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Knowing things keeps me alive. Then his expression shifted, just slightly. Gratitude flickered through the ice. And it helps me thank those who deserve it. She couldn't tell if that was comfort or a warning. For the first time, she noticed the faint tremor in his right hand as he reached for the glass of water and placed it on the bedside table beside her. Drink, he said simply. Their fingers brushed when she reached for it. The touch was accidental, brief, but it sent an unsteady spark through her chest. She pulled her hand back quickly, murmuring thanks, and took a sip, the cool water easing the burn in her throat. You've been unconscious for almost a day, he continued. You needed rest. My doctor said you'll recover soon, Aran. Ia nodded slowly, trying to process it all. The mansion, the man, the strange calm that wrapped around danger like silk. Everything about him radiated authority, but not the kind that shouted. His power whispered, and that made it even more frightening. When she finally found her voice again, it came out small. I should go. I have work. People who'll worry. The lie tasted bitter. No one would notice if she disappeared. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but the air in the room seemed to tighten. He rose from the chair, and the movement was silent but absolute, like a verdict. You're not leaving yet, he said. Her pulse quickened. I can't stay here. He took one slow step forward, his eyes holding hers. You saved my daughter's life, Arya. That makes you my responsibility now. Responsibility. The word wrapped itself around her like invisible chains. I don't want to be anyone's responsibility, she whispered, backing up against the pillows. He stopped at the edge of the bed, looking down at her. You misunderstand, he said softly, almost kindly. This isn't about what you want. It's about what's safe. Her voice trembled. Safe from what? He didn't answer. His gaze shifted to the window, to the faint gray light outside. Eat something. Rest. We'll talk later. Then he turned, leaving her with the echo of his footsteps and the heavy silence that followed. Arya sat frozen for several minutes, the water glass trembling in her hand. She wanted to believe she was safe, but nothing in this place felt safe. Everything gleamed too perfectly, like a cage made of gold. She pushed the covers aside, ignoring the ache in her ribs, and swung her feet to the floor. The cold marble stole the warmth from her skin as she crossed the room toward the door. Her hand gripped the ornate handle and twisted. It didn't move. Locked. Panic rose, sharp and sudden. She knocked twice. Hello? She called, her voice breaking. Footsteps approached on the other side, heavy, measured. A man's voice answered through the door, rough but calm. The boss said you're not to leave your room, ma'am. I'm not your prisoner, she said, forcing steel into her tone. A pause. Then the reply came, quieter, with an edge that chilled her. The boss wants you protected. The way he said protected made her stomach twist. She stepped back slowly, staring at the locked door, the echo of those words circling her mind like smoke. Protected or contained? The word protected kept echoing inside Arya's mind long after the footsteps faded. She stood in the center of the grand room, her reflection trembling faintly in the tall mirror across the bed. For a long time, she just stared at herself. Bandaged hands, soot-stained hair, the haunted eyes of a woman who had walked through fire twice. But this time, The flames weren't outside. They were inside this gilded mansion, burning quietly behind walls of marble and glass. She could feel them in the air, in the way the silence pressed too tightly, in the way her heart refused to slow. She tried again to twist the doorknob. It stayed firm, unyielding, as if mocking her. A part of her wanted to scream, to bang on the door until someone came, but another part, the tired, wounded part, told her that drawing attention in a mafia boss's house was a mistake she couldn't afford. So she turned away, breathing hard, and began to explore the room instead. Every detail seemed designed to confuse her sense of reality. The chandelier above her dripped with light, its crystals swaying slightly as if breathing. Paintings lined the walls, faces of people she didn't recognize, all beautiful and distant, like ghosts from an elegant past. On a small table beside the window lay a folded blanket and a vase of white lilies, their scent too clean, too pure for the kind of man she had just met. Somewhere deep inside the house, she heard a door close, footsteps crossing marble floors, and a voice murmuring in Italian, low, come, manding. Her stomach tightened. She couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, control, strategy, warning, the kind of voice that made men obey without question. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see the courtyard below. Armed guards lingered near the gates, their suits too sharp, their eyes too alert. Beyond them stretched an ocean of misty trees and darkness. There was no road, no city skyline, no sound of life, just isolation. The realization hit her like cold rain. She was trapped, not in a hospital, not in safety, in his world. The door creaked suddenly. She spun around, heart leaping, expecting one of the guards. But it was him. Lorenzo DeLuca stepped inside with a stillness that drew the air toward him. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled, the muscles in his forearms tense, veins standing out like threads of steel. The scent of gunpowder clung faintly to him, blending with expensive cologne and the ghost of smoke. His eyes, dark, focused, unreadable, found her immediately. "You shouldn't be standing," he said quietly. "I shouldn't be locked in," she shot back, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound brave. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her, the defiance, the fear, the storm in her gaze, until silence became unbearable. Then he sighed, walked to the door, and locked it again from the inside. Arya's breath caught. "What are you doing?" He turned to face her, his tone softer now but still edged in steel. "Keeping the world out," he said, "and keeping you from doing something foolish." Her eyes narrowed. "Like what? Breathing? Thinking?" "Leaving," he said simply. She took a hesitant step back as he moved closer. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." His gaze dropped briefly to her bandaged hands, then returned to her face. "You ran into a burning building without. But thinking. That means you don't care what happens to you." He paused, voice low. "People like that tend to get themselves killed, and right now you've done too much for me to let that happen." His words carried a strange tenderness, but underneath it, she heard the threat, not against her, but against anyone who might touch her now. "I don't need your protection," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You do. You just don't know it yet." Arya swallowed hard. The air between them shifted, thicker, charged. For the first time, she noticed the faint bruise on his knuckles, the tension in his jaw. There was danger in him, yes, but there was also grief. Something in the way he looked at her said he hadn't slept, that his world had tilted the night she ran into the flames. "Your daughter," she murmured, breaking the silence. "She's really okay?" His eyes softened, just a little. "She asked for you when she woke up." The words disarmed her. "She remembers me? She remembers the woman who carried her out of fire," he said quietly. "She thinks you're a hero." Arya felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm not," she whispered. Lorenzo tilted his head slightly. "No, heroes die young. You're something else entirely." The words hung between them, unsettling, intimate. He turned then, as if to leave, but paused near the door, his hand still on the lock. "There are people who'd pay a fortune to hurt me through my daughter," he said, his tone colder now, "which means anyone connected to her, even by accident, becomes a target." Her heart stopped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you can't go back to your old life. Not yet." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in. "You can't keep me here forever." He didn't reply. "Lorenzo." He finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something raw. Fear, maybe, or desire. "Arya," he said quietly, her name rolling off his tongue like a promise and a warning. "In my world, gratitude isn't given, it's owed." She read at him, confusion and dread twisting inside her. "Owed?" she repeated. His gaze held hers, dark and unflinching. "You saved my daughter's life. Now I'll save yours, whether you like it or not." Before she could speak, the door burst open. One of his guards, breathless, shouting something in Italian. Lorenzo's face turned to stone. "What is it?" he demanded. The guard's voice dropped. "They found her ex-husband. He's asking questions. And he's not alone." Arya's breath caught. Her pulse thundered in her throat. Lorenzo's expression hardened, the calm vanishing in an instant. He turned to her, his voice low and lethal. "Looks like your past just found you, cara mia." And before Arya could move, Lorenzo reached for his gun. The moment Lorenzo's hand wrapped around the gun, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Arya stood frozen, her breath shallow, her heart pounding so loud she swore he could hear it. The look in his eyes had changed. Gone was the calm mask of a man in control. Now there was fire, sharp and cold, burning beneath his skin. Without another word, he strode past the guard and disappeared into the corridor, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade as he barked orders in Italian. The sound of his men mobilizing followed, boots striking marble, weapons cocking, engines roaring somewhere outside. Arya stumbled toward the window, her trembling fingers brushing the curtain aside just enough to see the courtyard bathed in shadows and movement. Black cars lined up near the gates, headlights sliced through the fog. She could hear the sharp cadence of Lorenzo's commands, that deep voice that made even armed men obey without hesitation. The weight of what was happening began to sink in. Ryan, her ex-husband, had found her. The man who once swore he loved her now hunted her like prey. The same man who had laughed while she cried, who had burned her world to ashes when she tried to leave. She sank to the floor, clutching her bandaged hands to her chest, the scars throbbing as if remembering another kind of fire. Memories came rushing, back uninvited. His shouts, the broken glass, the night she spent wishing for silence that never came. And now, because she'd tried to live again, because she'd found a fragment of safety, he was coming for her once more. When Lorenzo returned, his expression was carved from stone. He set the gun on the dresser with a controlled clink, then crouched in front of her. "Look at me," he said quietly. She tried to avoid his gaze, but something in his tone pulled her eyes to his. "Who is he?" His question was calm, but beneath it pulsed something dangerous. "My ex-husband," she whispered, voice trembling. "Ryan Blake." The name itself felt poisonous. "He's not just angry, he's sick. When my parents tried to remarry me, he called them, threatened to kill them. He doesn't want me, he just doesn't want anyone else to have me." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her palms to her eyes, fighting tears. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "And he's the one making threats again?" She nodded. "He finds me wherever I go. He never stops." Lorenzo rose slowly, pacing, his fingers flexing restlessly at his side. The air around him shifted, colder, heavier. "He won't touch you again," he said, each word slow and deliberate. "You hear me? He won't breathe near you again." Arya shook her head, panic rising. "You don't understand, Lorenzo. He doesn't back down. You'll make it worse." He turned sharply, his voice dark as thunder. "There is no worse, Arya. There's only alive or dead. And if he comes for you again—" He reached for the gun, checking the clip with smooth precision. He'll learn which side of that line I stand on. Later that night, silence returned to the mansion, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Arya sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her reflection in the glass of the window. The woman staring back looked like a stranger, fragile, yet holding on. Behind her, the faint sound of footsteps echoed through the halls. Lorenzo hadn't slept either. He'd been on calls all night, speaking in low, clipped tones that carried through the walls. Every so often she caught fragments of his voice, soft but deadly. "Find him. I don't care how far he runs." She wished she could tell him to stop, that vengeance wouldn't save either of them, but part of her, the part that still trembled from Ryan's cruelty, wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that someone like Lorenzo could end the nightmare she couldn't escape. Around midnight, she rose quietly and stepped out of her room. The hallway stretched long and dim, lit only by the glow of distant sconces. She followed the faint sound of his voice until she found him in his study, standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, the city lights painting his face in shards of gold and shadow. His shoulders were tense, his voice low but lethal. "I don't care who he's with," he hissed into the phone. "If he breathes near my property again, bury him." Arya froze in the doorway, her breath catching. Property. The word hit her like a slap. She wanted to be angry, to remind him she wasn't something to be owned, but the raw emotion in his tone, the possessive fury, the tremor that betrayed fear, told her something else. He wasn't just angry. He was terrified of losing her. He hung up, running a hand through his hair. That's when he noticed her standing there. "You should be asleep," he said, voice softer now, strained. "I heard you," she whispered. "You called me yours." He stared at her, silence stretching between them like a pulled wire. "You are," he said finally, his tone quiet, dangerous, real. "Not because I own you, but because the moment you ran into that fire, you became part of my world, and in my world, no one touches what's mine." Her heart stuttered. The D should have terrified her, and maybe they did. But there was something in his eyes that made her chest ache instead of burn. A kind of broken devotion, something he didn't know how to give. Gently. She took a step closer, then stopped when he turned away, gripping the edge of his desk. "Lorenzo," she began, but her voice faltered. "You can't fight my past. It always finds a way back." He turned then, slowly, his gaze locking on hers, dark and unreadable. "Then let it come," he said softly. "Because this time, it's not finding you alone." The words made something twist deep inside her. Fear, relief, longing. She couldn't tell anymore. Before she could reply, a sharp noise split the night air. One single crack, then another. Gunshots. They echoed through the quiet like thunder. Arya flinched, stumbling toward the window. Lorenzo moved first, crossing the room in 2 strides, yanking her back just as glass shattered beside them. "Get down," he barked, pulling her against him. The world erupted in chaos. Guards shouting outside, the screech of tires, the whine of bullets slicing through the dark. Lorenzo dragged her to the floor behind the desk, shielding her with his body. The scent of gunpowder filled the room, and through the chaos she heard him whisper against her ear, voice low and steady, even as the world burned again. It started. And as the last window burst open under a spray of bullets, Arya realized what he meant. The war between her past and his world had begun, and there was no turning back. The voice outside the door froze Arya's soul like a knife made of memory. "Miss me?" Ryan's taunting whisper slithered through the cracks, and she went still, too still, the kind of stillness that came before panic. Her breath hitched in her throat, trembling against her ribs. She had prayed she'd never hear that voice again, not in this lifetime, not after the bruises, the blackmail, the fear that had driven her to flee in the middle of the night with nothing but shame in her chest and rain on her face. But fate had cruel humor. It had brought to the one man more dangerous than her past, the Mafia Boss, and somehow it had led her ex-husband straight to her. She took a shaky step back from the door, every creak of the floorboard echoing like thunder. "Ryan, go away," she whispered, her voice breaking. He chuckled, low and sickly sweet. "Come on, sweetheart. You didn't really think he could protect you from me, did you? You're still mine." Her eyes darted toward the window, darkness and lightning flashing beyond, rain pelting against the glass. The mansion suddenly felt too big, too cold, too full of ghosts. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't move. Fear had roots, and his voice had watered them for years. She could almost see him smirking on the other side, hand probably resting on his gun, confident that she'd crumble like before. But this time, she wasn't the same Arya. She looked around desperately for something, anything to hold. Her trembling hand found a broken shard of glass on the floor, and without thinking, she gripped it so tightly her palm began to bleed. The sting grounded her, a reminder that she was alive, not broken, not yet. "You can't scare me anymore," she whispered, though her voice trembled. He laughed again, the sound more chilling than the thunder. "We'll see about that." And then, before she could blink, an explosion ripped through the night outside, shaking the entire house. Arya fell to the floor as the chandelier above swayed, throwing sparks across the walls. Gunfire erupted in the distance, first a few shots, then an entire war breaking out. The deep growl of engines, the echo of tires screeching through wet streets, men shouting orders in Italian. Lorenzo's men. Her pulse raced. Ryan cursed from the hallway, and she heard the sharp metallic click of a gun being loaded. "He's here," Ryan muttered, his voice suddenly grim. He actually came. Arya crawled to the windside, Dow peering through the rain-streaked glass. The sight below stole her breath. The narrow street outside the DeLuca mansion burned like a scene out of hell, cars ablaze, black smoke rising into the storm, silhouettes darting between firelight and shadow. And in the middle of it, she saw him, Lorenzo DeLuca, the man who commanded entire cities with a nod, the man whose silence could make men confess their sins. He stepped out of a black car like he'd walked out of a nightmare, coat flaring behind him, gun gleaming under the rain, eyes locked on his prey. There was something primal in the way he moved, something that said he was not just fighting for vengeance, he was fighting for something he refused to lose. For someone. Arya's heart clenched painfully as realization sank in. He was fighting for her. Bullets cut through the air, sparking against steel. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He moved like a shadow, each shot precise, merciless. His men fanned out behind him, shouting, ducking, returning fire, but he stayed at the front, the storm itself made flesh. Every muscle in his body burned with fury and protectiveness, a deadly mix that made him unstoppable. He was a man used to blood, but tonight it wasn't business, it was personal. He thought of the fear he'd seen in Arya's eyes, the fragility she tried to hide behind strength, and it ignited something in him that even he didn't recognize. He would paint the streets red before he let her past crawl back into her life. Arya pressed her forehead to the cold glass, tears mixing with rain. Every gunshot made her flinch, every scream outside tore at her chest. She wanted to run out there, to beg him to stop, but her body wouldn't obey. All she could do was watch the man she barely knew fight like a demon for her. Ryan's men scattered like rats, but Lorenzo was relentless. He caught one, dragged him by the collar, pressed the barrel of his gun beneath the man's jaw. "Where is Blake?" His voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. The man choked out something in English, but before he could finish, a bullet silenced him. Lorenzo dropped Todd's, ed him, and turned to the next. His coat was soaked, his knuckles split, but his eyes burned brighter than the flames. He spotted Ryan near the alley, trying to retreat, but the crowd of chaos blocked his path. Their eyes met across the rain, two men separated by destiny and one woman's courage. Ryan smirked, retreating into the fog, knowing Lorenzo couldn't chase without leaving his men exposed. "Run while you can," Lorenzo murmured, raising his gun one last time. The shot shattered a nearby streetlight, plunging everything into darkness. The echoes of the firefight faded, leaving only the steady drum of rain and the hiss of burning cars. When silence finally fell, Lorenzo stood alone in the middle of the wreckage, smoke curling around him like ghosts of the men he'd killed. His chest heaved, his breath coming in harsh, uneven gasps. Blood dripped from his sleeve, mingling with rainwater. He could still taste the metallic sting of rage on his tongue. One of his men approached, voice shaking slightly. "Boss, they're retreating." Blake escaped. Lorenzo didn't answer. He stared down the road where Ryan had vanished, eyes dark and unblinking. "He made her bleed once," he said quietly, holstering his gun. "He won't do it again." Lightning flashed behind him, painting his silhouette against the ruins. For a brief second, he looked less like a man and more like a fallen god. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the car, his coat trailing smoke and rain in his wake. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. And as Arya watched from the window above, tears streaming down her face, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. She was no longer afraid of Lorenzo DeLuca. She was afraid of how much she needed him. The mansion's grand doors opened with a groan that echoed through the marble hall. Rain trailed in first, then the scent of smoke and metal, and finagisi. Ali Lorenzo himself, dark, drenched, wounded. His white shirt was half torn, the fabric stained with streaks of blood and soot, and yet he carried himself with the same unyielding power that made men tremble at his name. Arya stood frozen near the staircase, breath catching when she saw him. For one heartbeat, the world felt suspended between them, his shadow against the light, her trembling figure against the banister. Then she ran toward him, her bare feet slapping softly on the marble. "Lorenzo!" she gasped, voice cracking. He lifted his head, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw exhaustion in his eyes, a quiet, human kind of pain hidden behind the predator's calm. "It's just a scratch," he muttered, but his knees nearly buckled. She caught him before he fell. Her arms barely reached around his torso, yet somehow she steadied him, guiding him to the couch in the study. He tried to wave her off, to reclaim his usual cold command, but she ignored him and fetched a towel, a bowl of water, trembling all the while. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "You shouldn't have gone out there alone." His lips curved in something between a smile and a grimace. "I don't send men to fight for what's mine." She flinched at the words, unsure if he meant her, but her hands didn't stop moving. She pressed the towel to his shoulder, and he hissed softly. "Hold still," she murmured. He studied her face in silence, the furrow of her brow, the determination that replaced her fear. Every brush of her fingers against his skin burned hotter than the wound itself. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing through tall windows, and inside only their breaths filled the quiet. When she reached to clean the cut on his chest, her fingertips trembled. He caught her wrist before she could pull away. His voice dropped, rough as gravel. "You shouldn't care for a man like me." The words weren't a warning. They were a confession. Arya's eyes lifted to meet his, and for a moment, the world disappeared. There was only the pulse beneath his fingers, the tea, thunder outside, and the faint scent of rain and smoke clinging to his skin. "Maybe I shouldn't," she whispered back, "but I do." Something inside him cracked then, a wall he had spent years building with rage, loyalty, and blood. His hand slid from her wrist to her jaw, his thumb tracing the corner of her mouth, and the air between them thickened. He leaned closer, close enough that she could feel his heartbeat through the damp fabric, close enough that her breath caught and her thoughts scattered. "Arya," he breathed, the name trembling against her lips. Her eyes fluttered shut, a tear escaping down her cheek. The distance between them vanished until only a breath separated them. For a man who ruled by control, Lorenzo felt none now. His chest ached with a longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The world seemed to still, the firelight flickering against the walls, rain easing into a whisper, the two of them suspended in something that felt both forbidden and inevitable. And then the shrill ring of his phone shattered the moment like glass. Lorenzo froze, his jaw tightening. The call came again, urgent. He exhaled sharply, cursing under his breath before pulling the phone from his pocket. "What?" he snapped. On the other end, a guard's voice crackled through the static, breathless, panicked. "Boss, it's Isabella. She escaped. Your daughter's missing again." For a heartbeat, everything inside Lorenzo went silent. Then he stood abruptly, blood still seeping through his bandage, fury igniting in his eyes. The towel slipped from Arya's hands to the floor, the water bowl overturning, splashing crimson-stained droplets across the marble. "What did you say?" His voice was a low, lethal growl that made the light seem to flicker. "We're searching, but she's gone," the man stammered. Lorenzo ended the call without another word, his chest heaving. He turned to T-Sun. He window where lightning split the sky, his reflection a storm of its own. Arya rose slowly, heart pounding. "Lorenzo?" she whispered. He didn't answer. His hand clenched around the phone until it cracked. Outside, thunder rolled across the city, and somewhere in the darkness, a child's faint scream echoed back through the rain. The storm hadn't stopped when the scream pierced the night. It had only grown angrier, as if the heavens themselves were furious at what had been unleashed. Lorenzo DeLuca was already moving before Arya could speak. The mansion doors flung open with a force that made the hinges groan in protest. The cold rain drenched him instantly, washing blood from his sleeve, but he didn't care. "Isabella!" His voice roared into the darkness, echoing off the marble steps and vanishing into the thunder. His men scrambled, barking orders, their radios crackling with updates that were all the same. Nothing, no trace, gone. Arya followed him out, despite the guard's protests, clutching the soaked hem of her dress, her heart hammering with dread. She had seen that scream in her mind before she heard it. She knew a child's fear when it came from the soul. "Let me help," she pleaded, but Lorenzo turned sharply, eyes blazing with grief and fury. "You stay inside," he ordered. His tone was rough, almost cruel, but underneath it was fear. He couldn't lose another person he cared about. But Arya didn't listen. She had already lost everything once. She wouldn't stand idle while another innocent paid the price. She ran after him into the storm, her voice breaking through the wind. "You can't do this alone." Lorenzo stopped, just for a second, staring at her through the rain. Lightning carved his face in silver and shadow. He saw the same fire in her that had pulled his daughter from the flames the first time, and something in him gave in. "Fine," he growled, "but you stay close to me." The city unfolded before them like a war zone. Streets gleamed with water and gun oil, alleys whispered with secrets. Lorenzo's black car sliced through the downpour as his men fed him updates through the radio. Isabella's school uniform found near the old docks, an unmarked van seen heading west. Arya sat beside him, her hands twisted together, her lips moving in silent prayer. The tension inside the car was suffocating. Only the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the rain filled the silence between them. Lorenzo's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the road, but beneath that cold exterior, his heart was a storm. He remembered Isabella's laugh, her tiny hands clutching his when she had nightmares, her innocent question, "Daddy, are monsters real?" And his promise that as long as he breathed, none would touch her. Now that promise was being tested, and he would burn the world before he broke it. Arya watched him, the veins on his hands, the way he gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the leather creaked. He looked untouchable, yet she saw something raw and breaking behind those eyes. She wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that some evils couldn't be contained, but the words died on her tongue. There was no room for softness in this kind of night. They reached the docks just as dawn's first gray light tried to bleed through the storm. The air smelled of rust, gasoline, and sea salt. Lorenzo's men surrounded a warehouse that loomed at the edge of the pier, its windows dark, its doors chained, but faint movement flickered inside. Lorenzo gave a silent signal. Within seconds, his men fanned out, guns raised. Arya crouched beside a stack of crates, her dress soaked, her hair clinging to her face, her heart thundering like a drum. The tension crackled like static. Lorenzo moved first, kicking the door open, and chaos erupted. Bullets whistled through the air, sparks flying off metal beams, shouts in English and Italian colliding in the dark. Arya ducked behind a pillar, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Through the smoke, she saw Ryan's men, dragging a small figure toward the back exit, Isabella, bound and terrified. Something inside Arya snapped. Before fear could take hold, she ran. She darted between shadows, ignoring the gunfire, her lungs burning, her feet sliding across the slick floor. "Isabella!" she screamed. The child's eyes widened, recognition flickering through the tears. "Miss Arya!" That was all it took. Adrenaline roared through Arya's veins. She lunged forward, slamming a wooden plank into the head of the man holding the girl. He crumpled, and she yanked Isabella free, pulling her into her arms. "It's okay, baby. It's okay, I've got you," she whispered, her voice shaking, but steady enough to soothe the trembling child. Lorenzo saw them through the haze, his heart seizing at the sight. For a second, the entire world narrowed to that image, Arya clutching his daughter, shielding her with her own body as the warehouse burned and bullets danced around them. He fired 2 clean shots, taking down the men who aimed at her, then reached them in 3 strides. His arm went around both of them, his gun still smoking, his chest heaving. "I told you to stay behind," he said, voice low but trembling with something that wasn't anger. It was fear. Arya met his eyes, her face streaked with soot and rain. And let her die? Never. Something inside him broke at that. He pulled them both close for just a heartbeat, pressing his forehead against Arya's, the heat of chaos surrounding them like the first fire that had brought them together. "Let's get out of here," he muttered, grabbing her hand. Together they ran through the burning wreckage, Isabella clinging to Arya's neck, the flames painting the night orange and red. Outside, his men covered their escape, gunfire echoing across the docks as they reached the car. Lorenzo shoved the door open, yelling for his driver, but the street was empty. Only the rain waited. "Get in," he barked. Arya climbed into the back seat with Isabella, holding her tight as the engine roared to life. Lorenzo slid into the front, blood running down his temple, eyes locked on the mirror. "We're safe now," Arya whispered, but her words barely reached him. He knew better. The kind of peace they sought didn't exist in their world. It was just the silence before another storm. The car sped down the slick road, headlights slicing through the mist. Arya brushed Isabella's hair back gently, whispering lullabies under her breath, trying to keep her calm. Lorenzo's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his gaze scanning every shadow. "She's going to be okay," Arya murmured, and for a fleeting second he let himself believe her. The child's breathing slowed, exhaustion pulled her toward sleep. The rain softened to a drizzle, the tension easing just slightly, and then, out of nowhere, a flash of movement in the road ahead. Lorenzo slammed the brakes, tires screaming against wet asphalt. Arya gasped as the car jolted to a stop. The headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road, dripping wet, smiling like a ghost risen from hell. Ryan. His hair was plastered to his forehead, a gun gleaming in his hand. The rain turned silver around him, every drop catching light from the car's beams. Lorenzo's heart dropped into his stomach, and Arya's pulse went still. Ryan stepped forward slowly, the barrel of his gun leveling until it pointed directly at Arya's head. His voice cut through the night, smooth and poisonous. "If I can't have you," he said, his smile twisting into something feral, "no one will." The sound of the gun cocking echoed through the storm, and Arya's scream was swallowed by the thunder. The gunshot split the night like a scream, echoing through Arya's bones before she could even breathe. Ryan staggered back, eyes wide, shock flooding his cruel face before it twisted into rage. Lorenzo stood between her and death, his gun still smoking, his chest rising and falling like a storm barely contained. Ryan lunged forward, wild and bloodstained, crashing into Lorenzo with the last of his hate. The world became a blur of fists, steel, and fury. Furniture shattered, glass exploded across the floor, and Arya could only watch in terror, as two men, one who had destroyed her and one who could destroy everything else, fought like beasts in the dark. Ryan's laugh was broken, mad, echoing through the warehouse. "You think you can save her? You think she's clean?" he spat, punching Lorenzo hard enough to draw blood. "She's already ruined." Lorenzo's roar silenced him, primal and raw, as he slammed Ryan into the wall, his voice low and venomous. "She's mine," he said, each word carved from the fire inside him, and then the final shot rang out. Ryan crumpled, his body collapsing in a heap that would never rise again. The silence that followed was too heavy, too complete. Smoke drifted like ghosts through the broken room, and the only sound was Arya's shuddering breath. Her knees gave out, but Lorenzo caught her before she hit the ground, his arms trembling from adrenaline and pain. "It's over," he murmured, though his voice cracked on the word, as if even he didn't believe it. She stared at Ryan's body, the man who had once promised her forever, now lifeless at the feet of another man, whose darkness both terrified and comforted her. Tears burned her cheeks, not for Ryan, but for the years he'd stolen, the innocence he'd shattered. Lorenzo wiped one tear away with his thumb, the gesture startlingly gentle for a man who had just taken a life. "You could have died because of me," he whispered, his voice breaking, rough and unguarded. His confession shattered something inside her. He wasn't the cold, untouchable boss the city feared. He was a man bleeding from too many invisible wounds, a man terrified of losing what he didn't yet know how to love. Arya's breath hitched, the air thick between them, heavy with pain and something more dangerous. Need. Lorenzo's hand cupped the back of her neck, his thumb brushing her pulse, feeling the proof that she was alive. "Don't look at me like that," he murmured, though his eyes never left hers. She didn't listen. She couldn't. The distance between them dissolved, like gravity had been rewritten just to pull them together. When his lips finally met hers, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate, trembling, almost cruel in its hunger. Every unsaid word, every denied feeling, every scar screamed through that kiss. She tasted the salt of her own tears, the metallic edge of his blood, and the fire of everything they weren't supposed to want. His hands tangled in her hair, hers gripped his shirt, and the world around them fell away. There was no mafia, no enemies, no past, just two broken souls colliding in the ashes of everything they'd lost. When they finally tore apart, breathless and trembling, Arya didn't know whether to cry or run. Lorenzo pressed his forehead to hers, whispering against her lips, "I'll burn the world before I lose you." But the morning didn't wait for promises. Sunlight crept over the city, cold and cruel, dragging them back into reality. The world outside their fragile silence was already stirring. Phones rang. News spread like wildfire. Across the streets and alleys of the underworld, whispers took shape. Lorenzo DeLuca has fallen. He had killed for a woman, kissed her, chosen her, and now every rival family smelled blood. From the shadowed corners of the city, eyes turned toward his empire, hungry and waiting. Arya stood at the window, watching the sunrise break over the skyline, unaware that the storm they'd tried to escape was only just beginning. And in that fleeting stillness, before the chaos returned, a sniper's lens glinted from a nearby rooftop, its crosshairs fixed not on Lorenzo, but on her. The morning light bled through the curtains like a cruel reminder that peace never lasts in the world, Lorenzo DeLuca ruled. Arya stood by the tall window, lost in thought, unaware that the city beyond was holding its breath. The soft warmth of dawn kissed her skin, but she felt only a chill, the echo of last night's violence still trembling inside her. Lorenzo had disappeared into another room to make calls, his voice low, sharp, the tone of a man already rebuilding walls she had just begun to break. She didn't see the shadow on the rooftop across the courtyard. She didn't see the gleam of metal catching the light. All she heard was the distant hum of engines, the whisper of the city waking, and then a faint click, almost too quiet to notice. The next sound shattered everything. Glass exploded. Arya's scream tore through the air as the window burst inward, shards slicing through sunlight. Lorenzo was there in an instant, slamming into her, dragging her down as a bullet tore through the space where she had just stood. The world spun. His weight pinned her to the floor, protective, desperate, his heart hammering against her chest. "Stay down," he barked, voice laced with fear that didn't belong to a man like him. He pulled his gun from his holster, firing back through the broken window in quick, precise bursts. His men swarmed into the room, shouting, confused, the chaos echoing through the mansion's marble halls. Arya's hands trembled as she clutched the fabric of his shirt, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She'd seen death before, but not like this, not aimed at her, not in the arms of someone who would kill to keep her breathing. "They found us," Lorenzo growled, dragging her to her feet, one arm still around her waist. Blood dripped from a cut along his temple, glinting red in the morning light. "Get her to the panic room," he ordered his guards, but his eyes never left hers, full of something she'd never seen in him before. Terror. She shook her head, refusing to move. "No, what about Isabella?" The child's name cracked between them like a prayer and a wound. "She's safe," he said, though his voice faltered. "Now move." But Arya's legs wouldn't obey. Her body felt heavy, her heart a storm of confusion and fear and the haunting memory of last night's kiss. It was supposed to be a beginning, but now it felt like a curse. The guards grabbed her, pulling her toward the stairs as more gunfire erupted outside. The mansion, once untouchable, was now a battlefield. Arya stumbled through the smoke and echoing chaos, catching glimpses of black-suited men sprinting down hallways, shouting orders, returning fire. She could hear Lorenzo shouting behind her, his voice growing distant, swallowed by the violence. The panic room door loomed ahead, a cold steel barrier that promised safety but felt like a cage. "Inside!" one of the guards shouted, pushing her forward, but she froze. A child's cry, high, terrified, cut through the air. Isabella. Without thinking, Arya broke free, sprinting toward the sound before anyone could stop her. "Arya!" Lorenzo's voice thundered through the corridor, but she didn't turn back. Smoke filled her lungs, her vision blurred by tears and dust, but she followed the sound until she reached the west wing, where the walls were scarred by bullet holes and shattered glass. There, huddled beneath an overturned table, was Isabella, her tiny hands over her ears, sobbing for her father. Arya dropped to her knees, gathering the child into her arms. "I've got you, sweetheart," she whispered, her own voice trembling. "You're safe now, I promise." But the promise tasted like a lie because she could hear footsteps, heavy, deliberate, approaching from behind. She turned, her breath catching as a masked man stepped from the smoke, his gun raised. Time fractured. The world shrank to the sound of Isabella's cries and the click of a weapon being cocked. Before he could fire, a single shot rang out, from behind Arya. The man fell, lifeless, and Lorenzo emerged from the haze like a phantom of war, gun still smoking, his expression a mask of fury and relief. He grabbed Arya by the arm, pulling her close, his voice raw. "When I tell you to run, you run. You done." "To play hero again, you understand?" She wanted to argue, to scream that she couldn't leave his daughter, that she couldn't lose anyone else, but his eyes silenced her. There was no cruelty there, only fear buried beneath his anger. They ran together, carrying Isabella through corridors littered with glass and blood. The guards formed a barrier around them, returning fire as they pushed toward the garage. Every step felt like walking through the heart of a nightmare. The mansion, their fragile refuge, was burning from the inside. Arya's pulse roared in her ears. Lorenzo's hand never left hers. When they reached the garage, engines roared to life, tires screeching. He shoved her and Isabella into the back seat of a bulletproof SUV, slamming the door behind them. "Drive," he ordered, and the car lurched forward, bullets pinging against the armor like rain. Arya clutched Isabella close, whispering soft words she barely believed. Through the glass, she saw the mansion shrinking behind them, smoke curling into the sky like a ghost of everything they'd tried to build. "Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Where will we go?" He didn't answer. His jaw was clenched, eyes fixed on the road ahead, the reflection of fire dancing in them. But his silence spoke louder than any words. He didn't know either. The convoy sped into the countryside, away from the city, away from everything familiar. The sky darkened again, rain beginning to fall in thin, cold streams that blurred the world into streaks of silver and gray. Arya's body ached, her mind spinning between fear and disbelief. She looked at Lorenzo, his face hard as stone, and wondered if he blamed her for all of it, for the bullet that was meant for her, for the war she dragged into his life. But then his hand reached for hers, finding it in the dark. Just a touch, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. Hours passed in silence until the car finally stopped before an abandoned countryside villa, its windows boarded, its gardens wild. "We'll stay here until I clean up the mess," Lorenzo said quietly, helping Isabella out of the car. His words were calm, but his eyes burned with the kind of fury that promised retribution. Arya followed him inside, her heart heavy, her mind replaying the gunshot, the shattering glass, the moment he had thrown himself between her and death. She wanted to thank him, but the words felt too small. He poured himself a drink instead, staring out the window into the rain. "Someone wanted you dead," he said finally, voice cold. "And now I want to know who." She swallowed, fear rising again. "It wasn't Ryan. He's gone." Lorenzo's hand tightened around the glass, cracking it slightly. "Then someone else has a death wish." The silence that followed was suffocating, charged with grief and anger, and something neither of them dared name. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, echoing like a warning. Arya turned to comfort Isabella, but her reflection in the window froze her heart. In the distance, beyond the rain, headlights flickered, two cars parked down the dirt road, engines running. Lorenzo followed her gaze, his face hardening. "They found us," he whispered, holstering his gun. He turned to her, his voice low and fierce. "No matter what happens, don't open that door until I come back." She wanted to protest, to beg him not to go, but he was already moving, his silhouette merging with the storm. The door slammed. Rain swallowed him whole. Arya clutched Isabella close, listening as the thunder outside was replaced by the sound of gunfire once again. The storm raged louder. The lights flickered, and then a knock at the door. Slow, deliberate, not Lorenzo's. The knock at the villa door echoed like the ticking of a loaded gun, slow and heavy, each sound carving through Arya's chest as she clutched Isabella tighter. Rain bled down the glass, the storm outside growling against the roof, and every drop felt like a warning. Arya didn't move. Her heart pounded so hard she thought whoever stood on the other side could hear it. The knock came again, 3 times, deliberate, confident. She whispered Isabella's name, her voice trembling, urging her to hide beneath the table. Then, silence, the kind that makes you realize you're not alone. The doorknob turned slowly. Arya's breath caught, and before she could react, the door creaked open to reveal one of Lorenzo's men. Marco, the tall, quiet one with eyes like frost and a scar along his jaw. Relief flooded her for half a heartbeat before it drained away. Something in his face was wrong, too calm, too cold. "Where's Lorenzo?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Marco didn't answer. He just stepped forward, water dripping from his coat, the barrel of his gun glinting beneath the dim light. "I'm sorry, Arya," he said finally, his tone flat, emotionless, like he'd already buried whatever part of himself could feel. "They offered me something I couldn't refuse." Arya's stomach twisted. She backed away slowly, but 2 more men appeared in the doorway behind him, faces hidden, weapons raised. "You don't have to do this," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "You don't know what he'll do when he finds out." Marco gave a bitter, almost haunted smile. "Oh, I know exactly what he'll do. That's why I told them where to find you before he could stop me." Her blood ran cold. Everything blurred, the rain, the fear, the metallic scent of danger. She lunged for the panic room door, but one of the masked men grabbed her, twisting her arm painfully as she screamed. Let her go, Isabella cried, trying to run to her, but another man scooped the child up, shoving a cloth over her mouth until her small body went limp. Arya's world shattered. She kicked, fought, clawed, every motion raw with desperation, but it was useless. A blow struck the side of her head, white light bursting behind her eyes, and darkness swallowed her whole. When she woke, the air was thick with oil and iron, the smell of metal, the hum of machinery. Chains clinked as she moved, wrists bound above her head, her throat raw from shouting. She was in a warehouse, cold, cavernous, the kind of place where screams vanished into the walls. Her legs trembled as she shifted, the concrete beneath her slick with rainwater leaking from the ceiling. Shadows moved in the corners, men watching her, whispering to each other. Arya tried to speak, but her voice was weak, her mind spinning from the blow. Then she saw Marco standing near a flickering lamp, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. "Why?" she whispered, her words trembling like glass about to shatter. He looked up at her, eyes hollow. "Because loyalty doesn't feed a man's family, and fear doesn't keep you alive forever." His tone was bitter, but his hands shook slightly as he adjusted his gun. "You think he'll forgive you?" she spat, anger cutting through the fear. "You think the people you're helping won't kill you next?" He didn't answer. Somewhere outside, thunder cracked, and for a moment she thought she heard engines, Lorenzo's cars. Hope sparked, faint and trembling. But then the warehouse door opened, and instead of Lorenzo, another man entered, a stranger with sharp features and a cruel smirk. His suit was immaculate, his shoes spotless despite the mud outside. "So this is the woman who made the devil himself weak," he said, circling her like a predator. "Lorenzo DeLuca has burned cities for less. Let's see how far he'll go for you." Arya struggled against the chains, the metal cutting into her skin. "You're making a mistake," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "He'll come for me." The man chuckled, leaning close enough for her to smell the cologne on his collar. "That's the plan, sweetheart. We want him angry. Angry men make sloppy choices." He turned to his men. "Spread the word. The DeLuca heir is alive, and his heart's hostage is in our hands." The words sent a chill through her. Heart's hostage. That's what she had become without even realizing it. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the tin roof like war drums. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't exist in fear. She replayed Lorenzo's last look before he left the villa, the way his eyes had promised safety, the warmth of his hand against hers. It was enough to keep her breathing, until the radio crackled to life. Marco stiffened, turning toward the table where a small transmitter blinked with static. The voice that came through was unmistakable, low, rough, and burning with fury. "Where is she?" Lorenzo's tone was calm, but it carried the weight of death. Arya's heart stopped. "Ah, the king himself," the stranger mocked, grabbing the radio. "We have your queen, DeLuca. Come alone, and maybe she'll live long enough to say goodbye." Silence stretched thin and dangerous. Then Lorenzo's voice returned, colder than the storm. "If you hurt her, I'll make your blood a language every man in this city will learn to fear." The enemy laughed, tossing the radio back onto the table. "He's bluffing," one of the men muttered. "No," Marco said quietly. "He never bluffs." Arya's pulse quickened. She could almost feel Lorenzo moving toward her, somewhere in the dark, every second a countdown. She knew what he was capable of, but she also knew what this meant. He'd come for her no matter the cost. And she couldn't let him destroy everything for her. She struggled against the chains again, trying to slip her wrist free, ignoring the pain slicing into her skin. Blood trickled down her arm, warm and steady, but she didn't stop. The storm outside grew louder, the thunder blending with distant gunfire. He was close. She could feel it, the way her heartbeat synced with the chaos beyond the walls. Then, the warehouse lights flickered once, twice, and went out. Silence. For a heartbeat, all that existed was her ragged breathing and the steady patter of rain. Then, the sound of glass breaking. A scream. Gunfire erupted, chaos exploding in every direction. Shadows darted across the room as bullets tore through metal and flesh. Alike. Arya ducked instinctively, the chains biting deeper as she tried to shield herself. Men shouted orders, some running for the exits, others firing blindly. Through the storm of sound and fear, a familiar voice roared from the darkness. "Get your hands off her!" It was Lorenzo. Close. Furious. Alive. The sound of him was enough to make her eyes fill with tears. She called his name, barely audible above the fight, and then she saw him. A figure in black, eyes like molten steel, moving through the chaos with terrifying precision. Every man who stood between them fell. But before he could reach her, Marco stepped from behind a pillar, gun aimed straight at Lorenzo's back. "Don't!" Arya screamed, but her voice drowned beneath the thunder of gunfire. Marco's shot missed, grazing Lorenzo's arm, but Lorenzo's response was instant, a single bullet that dropped him where he stood. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of rain and Arya's quiet sobs. Lorenzo rushed to her, breaking the chains with trembling hands, his face streaked with blood and rain. "You're safe," he whispered, pulling her against his chest, though his body was shaking. "It's over." But Arya knew it wasn't. Not yet. Over Lorenzo's shoulder, she saw the blinking light of the radio still active, a faint voice whispering through the static. "We have the girl," it said. Her heart dropped. Isabella. She looked at Lorenzo, eyes wide with horror. Before she could speak, the radio crackled louder, and then his voice came through, cold, broken, but determined. "I'm coming for you," Lorenzo said, and Arya realized he wasn't talking to her this time. His eyes lifted to the dark horizon outside, jaw clenched with a promise that could burn nations. "I'm coming for you," he repeated into the storm, "even if it means I burn the world down." As Lorenzo DeLuca stood at the edge of the enemy's estate, the mansion rising before him like a beast from his nightmares, black windows, steel gates, and guards swarming like shadows. The echo of his own words still rang in his skull. "I'm coming for you, even if it means I burn the world down." Tonight, he meant every syllable. His coat was soaked, his knuckles bloodied, and his eyes, those dark, haunted eyes, glowed with the fury of a man who had already lost everything once and refused to lose again. Lightning split the sky as he moved forward, silent and deadly, each step carrying the weight of every soul he'd buried. His gun gleamed beneath the storm, a whisper of death in his hands. The guards never saw him coming. The first fell before he even turned. The second had time to gasp before a blade found his throat. Lorenzo was no longer a man. He was wrath, carved from bone and grief. Inside, alarms blared, but he didn't flinch. He kicked the front doors open, the sound echoing through the vast hall, his presence a storm breaking through marble and blood. The mansion was a labyrinth of corridors and screams. He moved through it like a ghost of retribution, his bullets finding their marks with ruthless precision. Every face he saw was another barrier between him and Arya, and he tore them all down without mercy. Each kill was a heartbeat closer to her. Somewhere deep inside, he could still hear her voice, the way she said his name, the way her fear had trembled through the radio before it went silent. That silence was what drove him now, more than rage, more than love. It was the unbearable quiet of losing her again. Meanwhile, deep in the mansion's lower level, Arya was still fighting. Her wrists were raw from the ropes that bound her, her breath coming in sharp, painful bursts. The room was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb swaying above her, but her spirit burned too bright to die here. 2 men guarded her cell, pacing and laughing in low voices about what their boss would do to her when Lorenzo came. She waited. She listened. When one of them turned his back, she moved, grabbing the rusted metal pipe she'd hidden, and beneath her chair. It cracked across his skull with a sound that echoed like thunder. The second lunged for her, but she drove the pipe into his ribs, twisting with everything left inside her. He fell, cursing, bleeding, stunned that a woman could fight like fire. She stumbled toward the door, every breath a knife, every step fueled by the memory of Lorenzo's promise. Upstairs, the storm had come inside. The chandelier swayed from the force of the explosions as Lorenzo advanced, leaving trails of smoke and silence in his wake. He called her name once, twice, each time louder, his voice raw with desperation. Then faintly, through the crackle of gunfire and rain, he heard it. Lorenzo! It was her, alive. The sound froze him for a heartbeat, then broke him open entirely. He sprinted toward the voice, kicking down doors, his vision narrowing to the sound of her breath. He reached the lower corridor just as a group of armed men rounded the corner. They didn't have time to fire. His bullets tore through the air, precise, final. The last man fell at his feet, and Lorenzo didn't even slow down. He found her at the end of the hall, standing in the doorway, her face pale but defiant, a smear of blood along her cheek and a fire in her eyes. For a moment everything stopped, the storm, the screams, the world itself. She was alive. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, grabbing her face in his trembling hands, his thumb brushing the cut on her lip as if to erase it. "You saved my daughter once." His voice cracked, low and broken. "Now let me save you." She tried to speak, to tell him she didn't need saving anymore, but the words died in her throat. All she could do was look at him, the man who had terrified the world, standing before her like a sinner begging for one more chance at grace. But there was no time for words. More footsteps echoed through the hall. Reinforcements. Lorenzo turned, gun raised, firing over her shoulder. Arya grabbed a weapon from the fallen guard and fought beside him, her movements sharp, instinctive, fearless. They moved, together like 2 halves of the same storm. Him, fury, her, resolve. Smoke and sparks filled the air as they cut their way toward freedom, every corner another ambush, every room another grave. She didn't realize she was crying until he caught her hand mid-run, squeezing it, grounding her in the chaos. "Almost there," he shouted. "Stay with me." They reached the staircase, the heavy front doors visible through the haze. Outside, rain poured like absolution. They were so close, but fate wasn't done testing them. A grenade clattered across the marble floor, rolling to a stop between them. Without thinking, Lorenzo shoved her forward, covering her body with his as the explosion ripped through the hall. The blast threw them both to the ground, debris crashing around them. Pain seared through his shoulder, but he pushed himself up, dragging her with him. Her face was streaked with soot, eyes wide with terror, but she was alive, and that was enough. They stumbled through the burning wreckage, coughing, stumbling toward the exit. The night outside was chaos. Cars overturned, men shouting, fire painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Lorenzo pulled her close, shielding her from the rain of embers. "We need to move, now," he barked, guiding her toward the courtyard where his car waited. Arya's heart pounded, each step a prayer. Behind them, the mansion groaned, its walls cracking under the weight of fire and fury. She glanced back once, seeing the building that had held her captive dissolve into flames. But the sight didn't bring relief. It brought dread. "Lorenzo!" she screamed, tugging his arm. The gas lines beneath the foundation were hissing, glowing through the cracks in the stone. He turned, eyes narrowing. Then, in one motion, he scooped her into his arms, running for the gates as the heat roared behind them. They burst through the doors, sprinting across the courtyard. Their bodies soaked in sweat and rain and smoke. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat was borrowed time. The car waited just beyond the gate, its engine running, one of Lorenzo's men waving frantically for them to hurry. They were meters away when the sound came, a low, building rumble that shook the ground beneath them. Lorenzo looked back, and for one impossible second, the world stood still. The mansion, his enemy's fortress, his battlefield, his graveyard, glowed like the heart of a dying star. He tightened his grip around Arya and whispered against her hair, "Close your eyes." The explosion hit like a god's wrath. Fire erupted into the night, the shockwave throwing them to the ground, glass and stone raining from the heavens. The sound was deafening, a roar that swallowed every scream, every word, every heartbeat. Arya's world went white, then black. When the dust settled, all that remained was the sound of rain falling on ash. She stirred, coughing, searching blindly through the smoke until she felt a hand, warm, trembling, find hers. Lorenzo's face appeared through the haze, blood trickling from his temple, his breathing ragged. He tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "You're safe," he whispered again, though neither of them believed it. In the distance, sirens wailed. Police, rival syndicates, vultures circling the ruins. Lorenzo looked back at the fire consuming the mansion, his jaw tightening. "It's over," Arya said weakly, clutching his hand. But his eyes told a different story, one that still burned with vengeance. "No," he murmured, his voice a quiet storm. "This is just the beginning." And then, another sound, faint but unmistakable, a single click from the darkness behind them. Arya froze, turning slowly. Through the smoke, a figure stepped forward, gun raised, his face half burned, half smiling. The one man Lorenzo thought was dead. The enemy leader, Cha-Yi-Sa, red but alive. "You forgot to finish the job, DeLuca," he rasped, aiming straight at Arya's heart. The gun fires, and everything goes black. As Lorenzo DeLuca stood at the edge of the enemy's estate, the mansion rising before him like a beast from his nightmares, black windows, steel gates, and guards swarming like shadows. The echo of his own words still rang in his skull. "I'm coming for you, even if it means I burn the world down." Tonight he meant every syllable. His coat was soaked, his knuckles bloodied, and his eyes, those dark, haunted eyes, glowed with the fury of a man who had already lost everything once and refused to lose again. Lightning split the sky as he moved forward, silent and deadly, each step carrying the weight of every soul he'd buried. His gun gleamed beneath the storm, a whisper of death in his hands. The guards never saw him coming. The first fell before he even turned. The second had time to gasp before a blade found his throat. Lorenzo was no longer a man, he was wrath, carved from bone and grief. Inside, alarms blared, but he didn't flinch. He kicked the front doors open, the sound echoing through the vast hall, his presence a storm breaking through marble and blood. The mansion was a labyrinth of corridors and screams. He moved through it like a ghost of retribution, his bullets finding their marks with ruthless precision. Every face he saw was another barrier between him and Arya, and he tore them all down without mercy. Each kill was a heartbeat closer to her. Somewhere deep inside, he could still hear her voice, the way she said his name, the way her fear had trembled through the radio before it went silent. That silence was what drove him now, more than rage, more than love. It was the unbearable quiet of losing her again. Meanwhile, deep in the mansion's lower level, Arya was still fighting. Her wrists were raw from the ropes that bound her, her breath coming in sharp, painful bursts. The room was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb swaying above her, but her spirit burned too bright to die here. 2 men guarded her cell, pacing, and laughing in low voices about what their boss would do to her when Lorenzo came. She waited. She listened. When one of them turned his back, she moved, grabbing the rusted metal pipe she'd hidden beneath her chair. It cracked across his skull with a sound that echoed like thunder. The second lunged for her, but she drove the pipe into his ribs, twisting with everything left inside her. He fell, cursing, bleeding, stunned that a woman could fight like fire. She stumbled toward the door, every breath a knife, every step fueled by the memory of Lorenzo's promise. Upstairs, the storm had come inside. The chandeliers swayed from the force of the explosions as Lorenzo advanced, leaving trails of smoke and silence in his wake. He called her name once, twice, each time louder, his voice raw with desperation. Then faintly, through the crackle of gunfire and rain, he heard it. "Lorenzo!" It was her, alive. The sound froze him for a heartbeat, then broke him open entirely. He sprinted toward the voice, kicking down doors, his vision narrowing to the sound of her breath. He reached the lower corridor just as a group of armed men rounded the corner. They didn't have time to fire.
His bullets tore through the air, precise, final. The last man fell at his feet, and Lorenzo didn't even slow down. He found her at the end of the hall, standing in the doorway, her face pale but defiant, a smear of blood along her cheek and a fire in her eyes. For a moment, everything stopped. The storm, the screams, the world itself. She was alive. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, grabbing her face in his trembling hands, his thumb brushing the cut on her lip as if to erase it. "You saved my daughter once." His voice cracked, low and broken. "Now let me save you." She tried to speak, to tell him she didn't need saving anymore, but the words died in her throat. All she could do was look at him, the man who had terrified the world, standing before her like a sinner begging for one more chance at grace. But there was no time for words. More footsteps echoed through the hall. Reinforcements. Lorenzo turned, gun raised, firing over her shoulder. Arya grabbed a weapon from the fallen guard and fought beside him, her movements sharp, instinctive, fearless. They moved together like 2 halves of the same storm, him, fury, her, resolve. Smoke and sparks filled the air as they cut their way toward freedom, every corner another ambush, every room another grave. She didn't realize she was crying until he caught her hand mid-run, squeezing it, grounding her in the chaos. "Almost there!" he shouted. "Stay with me!" They reached the staircase, the heavy front doors visible through the haze. Outside, rain poured like absolution. They were so close, but fate wasn't done testing them. A grenade clattered across the marble floor, rolling to a stop between them. Without thinking, Lorenzo shoved her forward, covering her body with his as the explosion ripped through the hall. The blast threw them both to the ground, debris crashing around them. Pain seared through his shoulder, but he pushed himself up, dragging her with him. Her face was streaked with soot, eyes wide with terror, but she was alive, and that was enough. They stumbled through the burning wreckage, coughing, stumbling toward the exit. The night outside was chaos, cars overturned, men shouting, fire painting the sky in shades of red and gold. Lorenzo pulled her close, shielding her from the rain of embers. "We need to move, now!" he barked, guiding her toward the courtyard where his car waited. Arya's heart pounded, each step a prayer. Behind them, the mansion groaned, its walls cracking under the weight of fire and fury. She glanced back once, seeing the building that had held her captive dissolve into flames. But the sight didn't bring relief, it brought dread. "Lorenzo!" she screamed, tugging his arm. The gas lines beneath the foundation were hissing, glowing through the cracks in the St. One. He turned, eyes narrowing. Then, in one motion, he scooped her into his arms, running for the gates as the heat roared behind them. They burst through the doors, sprinting across the courtyard, their bodies soaked in sweat and rain and smoke. Every breath burned. Every heartbeat was borrowed time. The car waited just beyond the gate, its engine running, one of Lorenzo's men waving frantically for them to hurry. They were meters away when the sound came, a low building rumble that shook the ground beneath them. Lorenzo looked back, and for one impossible second, the world stood still. The mansion, his enemy's fortress, his battlefield, his graveyard, glowed like the heart of a dying star. He tightened his grip around Arya and whispered against her hair, "Close your eyes." The explosion hit like a god's wrath. Fire erupted into the night, the shockwave throwing them to the ground, glass and stone raining from the heavens. The sound was deafening, a roar that swallowed every scream, every word, every heartbeat. Arya's world went white, then black. When the dust settled, all that remained was the sound of rain falling on ash. She stirred, coughing, searching blindly through the smoke until she felt a hand, warm, trembling, find hers. Lorenzo's face appeared through the haze, blood trickling from his temple, his breathing ragged. He tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "You're safe," he whispered again, though neither of them believed it. In the distance, sirens wailed. Police, rival syndicates, vultures circling the ruins. Lorenzo looked back at the fire consuming the mansion, his jaw tightening. It's over, Arya said weakly, clutching his hand. But his eyes told a different story, one that still burned with vengeance. No, he murmured, his voice a quiet storm. This is just the beginning. And then, another sound, faint but unmistakable, a single click from the darkening S behind them. Arya froze, turning slowly. Through the smoke, a figure stepped forward, gun raised, his face half burned, half smiling. The one man Lorenzo thought was dead. The enemy leader, charred but alive. You forgot to finish the job, DeLuca, he rasped, aiming straight at Arya's heart. The gun fires, and everything goes black. The gunshot cracked through the storm like a scream from hell itself, splitting the silence that followed the explosion. For one shattering heartbeat, the world stood still. The bullet tore through the smoke, slicing the air between life and death. Arya gasped, her body freezing as she felt Lorenzo yank her backward with brutal force, his arm wrapping around her protectively. The sound of metal meeting flesh echoed, dull and final. She turned her head, horror flooding her veins as she saw the dark bloom spreading across Lorenzo's shoulder, crimson staining his shirt in the rain. His grip didn't loosen. He didn't even flinch at first. His body was pure instinct, shoving her behind him, shielding her from the next shot that came just a breath later. The enemy's laughter echoed through the haze, low and ragged, a ghost's mockery. Lorenzo's jaw clenched. His eyes, those dark eyes that had burned through every sin, locked onto the man who refused to die. You should have stayed dead, Lorenzo growled, his voice rough as gravel, his breath coming in heavy, uneven bursts. Blood dripped down his hand, mixing with rain, but his stance never wavered. He raised his gun slowly, every movement deliberate, every breath soaked in fury and pain. The man smirked through the smoke, half of his face melted and unrecognizable, his voice a rasping echo of hatred. You think you can kill me again? He sneered. You already lost everything. Arya crawled to her knees behind the wreckage, trembling but fierce, her eyes darting between the two men locked in a silent war of will. Lorenzo, please, she whispered, reaching for him, but he didn't look back. His world had narrowed to the man in front of him, the one who had taken his peace, his family's safety, his blood. The rain fell harder, hissing against the fire still burning behind them. Lightning illuminated the courtyard for a brief, terrible second, and in that flash, Lorenzo moved. 2 shots fired almost at once, one from his gun, one from the enemy's. The sound was thunder, deafening and final. Both men staggered. Both bled. Arya's scream tore through the night as she stumbled forward, catching Lorenzo before he hit the ground. His gun clattered away, lost in the mud. The enemy fell too, collapsing against the ruined gate, blood pouring from his chest. He was still smiling as he sank, the madness never leaving his eyes. If I die, he gasped, choking on his own blood, you'll follow me soon, DeLuca. They're already coming. His head lolled to the side, and the storm swallowed his final breath. Arya's hands pressed against Lorenzo's wound, her fingers slick with blood, tears mixing with the rain. No, 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 stay with me, she begged, her voice breaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. Lorenzo's eyes fluttered open, his breathing ragged. He managed a faint, crooked smile. You still don't listen, he rasped, his voice barely audible, yet filled with that same dark tenderness that had always undone her. I told you to stay behind. She shook her head, her voice trembling. I told you, I'm not leaving you. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, everything else fading away. The fire, the rain, the ruins. Just them. 2 souls who had bled too much to turn back now. He reached up weakly, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face, his thumb trembling against her cheek. You're stronger than you think, he whispered. You always were. But before she could reply, headlights cut through the rain, black cars approaching fast, engines roaring through the night. Lorenzo's men? Or his enemies? Arya's heart seized with panic. Lorenzo's eyes snapped toward the no. His instincts fighting against his weakening body. Get down, he hissed, pushing her toward the ground just as bullets started raining again, this time from the outer gates. Arya ducked behind a chunk of fallen stone, clutching Lorenzo's gun with shaking hands. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stand, his entire body screaming in protest. The blood loss had drained his strength, but not his will. He fired back, short, controlled bursts, covering her. She returned the fire, remembering his lessons, the way he had shown her to aim for the shoulders, to breathe before pulling the trigger. The rain blurred her vision, but she hit two of them, her hands trembling with both terror and determination. The courtyard became a battlefield once more, lit by the strobing flashes of gunfire. When the last shot finally faded, silence hung heavy again, broken only by the storm. Arya looked around, panting, her hair plastered to her face. The cars were riddled with bullets, bodies scattered. Whoever had come, they weren't walking away. But victory felt hollow. She turned back to Lorenzo, her stomach twisting at the sight of him sinking to one knee, clutching his side. "Lorenzo!" she cried, running to him, catching him before he could fall. His eyes were distant now, his skin cold beneath her touch. "No, you don't get to leave me like this," she whispered fiercely, her tears falling onto his face. He managed a faint laugh, coughing. "You sound like me," he murmured, blood staining his lips, always refusing what's already decided. She shook her head violently, refusing the weight of his words. "Nothing's decided. Not yet." Sirens wailed in the distance now, closer this time, echoing through the broken city. The sound of approaching police, or perhaps another syndicate coming to claim what was left. The world was collapsing around them, yet for a fleeting moment, the chaos faded as he leaned his forehead against hers. "If I don't make it," he began. But she silenced him with a desperate kiss. It wasn't soft or gentle. It was fierce, trembling, soaked in blood and rain, and everything they never got to say. When she pulled away, she whispered against his lips, "Then I'll find you, even in hell, Lorenzo." His eyes flickered open at that, a faint smile ghosting across his face, like he wanted to believe her. "You'd burn the world too, wouldn't you?" he breathed. She nodded, her tears unstoppable. "I already did." She helped him up, draping his arm over her shoulder, their steps slow but unyielding as they stumbled toward the wreckage of the gates. The rain poured harder, washing away the blood on the ground, leaving behind only the red river that trailed behind them. The sky cracked open with another flash of lightning, illuminating the ruin of the mansion behind them, reduced to smoke and flame. Arya didn't look back this time. All that mattered was getting him out. They reached the edge of the road, the black car still smoldering nearby, its door hanging open. She lowered him gently into the seat, her fingers trembling as she tried to start the engine. It coughed once, twice, then roared to life. Relief surged through her chest, wild and dizzying. She turned to him, her voice shaking. "We're going home." But Lorenzo didn't answer. His head had fallen back against the seat, eyes closed, lips parted in a faint smile. "Lorenzo," she whispered, panic flooding her chest. She shook him, harder this time. "Lorenzo!" His chest rose faintly, barely. The sirens were louder now, flashing lights cutting through the rain. Arya's heartbeat roared in her ears. She pressed her hand against his cheek, her tears falling freely. "Don't you dare leave me, you bastard," she sobbed. For a second, just one, his fingers twitched, finding hers weakly. His voice was faint, almost lost beneath the thunder. "Drive," he whispered. "Don't stop." Her hands clenched around the wheel. She floored the accelerator, the car tearing down the slick road, the fire behind her, hem fading into the night. Rain lashed against the windshield, lightning striking the sky in furious flashes. Arya's vision blurred, her heart split between terror and determination. Beside her, Lorenzo's hand slipped from hers, falling limply against his side. She screamed his name again, but the wind swallowed it whole. Ahead, the road curved sharply toward the cliffs that overlooked the dark, endless sea. The car's tires screeched as she swerved to stay on the road, the world spinning, the storm blinding, and then, just as she thought she'd regained control, a blinding pair of headlights appeared in front of them. Another car. Fast, coming straight for them. There was no time to think, no time to brake.